This session is one that I am particularly excited about. The masterclasses every month are a great opportunity to have a deep dive into different areas of curriculum. But this one is one that I am particularly passionate about because lots of things are done in the name of integrated curriculum that I'm certainly not sure are in our students' best interests or are honoring the learning that needs to be happening in classrooms, and are really done more for the sake of ticking a box to say, yes, we're integrating curriculum. So Rasha has prepared a session for you today that might challenge your thinking or might give you the support for what you've been trying to say for the last 5 or maybe even 10 years. We will release a recording of the masterclass after the session. So if after the session there's somebody that you think needs to hear this message, or maybe you need to share it with a curriculum coordinator that's asking you to do something that you really don't think is in the best interest of your students, then you'll be able to share the link to the masterclass. Usually the links are available for 2 weeks. So you can share that and make sure that whoever needs to see this masterclass gets the opportunity to see it.
Yeah.
All right, I'll just make sure everybody is in. Yes, I think so. We haven't left anybody in the waiting room. So I'm going to hand over now to Rasha to introduce herself and continue with today's masterclass.
Yes. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are and what you're doing. I'm so excited to be here with you. And like Rachel said, it's really good to be spending this time with you on a very timely topic on the do's and don'ts of integrating curriculum. I'd love to, in addition to kind of knowing what curriculum you're running, I'm always fascinated by where people are coming from, and what time it is where you are. We've had people in the middle of the night and or people like me. It's 4 p.m. here on the East Coast of the United States in the state of Maryland. I'm about 45 minutes north of Washington, D.C. So love to know where you guys are, it kind of shows how dedicated people are when they come in at like 1:30 a.m. from India, for example. Wow, it's amazing. And it just kind of shows you also like the international audience that we have. I'm so always grateful to that international audience. While you're doing that, I'm going to share a little bit about me. I'm really grateful. This is my third masterclass doing with Rachel. It's number 3, right, Rachel? I think we've done like a leadership one. I did one about literacy. So you might have heard this if you've seen a masterclass from me before, but if you haven't, I'll tell you just a little bit about me. I am an English teacher by trade. At the very core of me, I'm an English teacher. I have also taught history. I've taught as young as 4th grade. I have not ventured to teach less than that. Those who can, in total awe of you. And I have done as old as 12th grade. I have also ventured to teach 6th grade math. I highly recommend it if you want to increase your knowledge about math. I learned so much more about ratios and percentages than I ever did as a student. I've also about 4 or 5 years ago, goodness gracious, I'm not sure when I got the certification, but I'm a certified concept-based curriculum instruction trainer and workshop leader. And I have co-authored with Tiffany Brown and Rachel literacy courses and inquiry-based and concept-based teaching for grades 3 to 10. For those of you who are in the collaborative, you might have seen my face in some of those courses. And I currently work at a school, but I also work with teachers and teaching teams internationally and curricular leaders to help create aligned and integrated units of inquiry. And so this topic is something that is near and dear to my heart. And I'll talk a little bit about the story for this in just a minute, but it's been in 3 years, 2 years in the making. It's been a long time in the making. Rachel has been very patient with me. More interesting stuff about me. I am of Egyptian descent. Yay, Egypt, and yay to the pyramids. I come from a family of teachers. Both my parents are educators. They started teaching in Egypt. My sisters are both educators. I married into a family of educators. My mother-in-law and my father-in-law are educators, so teaching is absolutely in my blood. Now it's about like 10 years ago, I ventured internationally to the United Arab Emirates. If you recognize that picture, that is the picture of the Grand Mosque in Abu Dhabi. That's where I learned everything IB. It was kind of my introduction to the International Baccalaureate. I started as an MYP English teacher, and then in a few years moved up to as a diploma coordinator, taught extended essay course, and was diploma coordinator. And then 5 years later, I moved back to the United States and was head of school for a small PYP school, but I was also the PYP coordinator. So I actually have working knowledge and experience in all three continuums. If you were to ask me when I was a diploma coordinator that I'll actually be working with 5-year-olds, I would have laughed in your face and thought, no way. And it is like one of my favorites. It's actually my favorite framework out of all of the IB's frameworks. So like a good teacher, we are going to start by activating prior knowledge. I would love to know in the chat when we say, and I know the feelings and words that I have when I talk about integrated curriculum, but I would love to know from you what words come to mind when I say the word integrated curriculum. These could be feeling words, they could be knowledge words. What words come to mind? What might you already know about integrated curriculum? Just pop those in the chat as I tell you a little bit of a story. So just kind of take a minute. Headache. Yes. Making connection. That was a very authentic, an authentic emotional connection. Yes, they're transferable, authentic connections, alignment. Oh no, forced connections. Yes, we're going to talk about that. Coordinating with other teachers. Absolutely. It is a must and necessary. Maybe that's where the headache comes from. STEAM, shift. Is that STEAM like out of your ears STEAM, or like STEAM as in like the integration of the STEAM subjects? I think it can go both ways. It depends on your context. Yes. Great, wonderful. So a lot of you kind of are kind of thinking about this already, about integrating curriculum. I'll tell you a little bit of a story. Rachel and I have been talking for a few years now about creating this course that addresses all of your questions and all of our questions about how best to integrate curriculum. Each time we work with teachers, we always get the same questions about integrating curriculum over and over and over again. So I'm gonna show you three kind of short questions / stories of some things, common things that come to us to talk when we're trying to address a little bit today, and also in the course that we're creating. So I want you to imagine with me, if you will, an art teacher. She just moved to an IB school. She's told as a new teacher that connecting to the unit of inquiry is so very important, that each unit she teaches has to somehow connect to this unit of inquiry. So she comes to us and she asks, she tells us the homeroom teacher is teaching social studies, and she's teaching how governments or governmental systems make laws. And she's like, I'm an art teacher. I can't really connect to that topic, but the key concept for the unit is change, and I can definitely connect to change. So my students are going to learn how to mix two primary colors and how mixing two primary colors can change and create a new color. And she asks us, is this a good connection? Is this a transdisciplinary connection? That's kind of one story. Another common story we get is imagine a PE teacher, and she is connecting to a science unit titled Our Bodies by having students take their pulse and check their recovery times. And she asks us, this is a really cool activity, and does it connect in a meaningful way? Is this a good connection to an interdisciplinary unit? And then let's look at a final example of a middle school math teacher, who told us that in any given year they have 3 days off the timetable for them to dedicate to integrating curriculum, and when students work on special projects. And does that meet the requirements for interdisciplinary learning? Does that count? So we're going to look at all these stories. I'm going to bring these stories up again and again as we're kind of together for this next hour. To kind of keep us honest and keep us organized, we will frame our time together with 3 guiding questions. The very first question is, what is integrated curriculum and what are the various models? What is the purpose of each model and when should you use it? And what should we avoid when writing integrated units? Okay. We're going to start with the very first question. What is integrated curriculum and what are the various models? I want you to take a minute and put in the chat, when you think of models of integrated curriculum, what are they? If you can remember one or two or three, when I think integrated curriculum and I think the various models, what comes to mind? What words or terms come to mind? You can put those in the chat. Conceptual, interdisciplinary, concept-driven, transdisciplinary, IDU, multidisciplinary, vertical horizontal planning, ATL. These are all words that come to mind. Multilingual. Okay. Yeah. Inquiry-based. Merging of different subjects. Yes, absolutely. I like that word, glocalization. Like, I'm going to use that word. I like it. Yeah, absolutely. These are words that come to mind, and some of what you said are actual names of models. So we're going to actually talk about them a little bit here today together. Just like with the term curriculum, there are a lot of ways of defining integration. But at its foundation, curriculum integration is an approach that combines elements from different subjects or disciplines into a unified learning experience. To what extent do two disciplines integrate and how they integrate depends on the model. So various models of integrating curriculum determine how disciplines interact and to what extent disciplines interact. So we're going to talk about this idea of how they're interacting and to what extent they're interacting. There are three main models of curriculum integration. There are actually more, but we're going to talk about three. The first one is the one we are most familiar with, and that's the disciplinary model. The second one is interdisciplinary. If you are in an MYP school, you might be familiar with this term. MYP identifies itself as mainly an interdisciplinary framework. The third model is transdisciplinary. If you're a PYP school, you might be familiar with this model, as the PYP identifies itself as transdisciplinary. As I said, there are more models that describe curriculum integration, such as intradisciplinary, multidisciplinary, cross-disciplinary. Having to do research about this, and there's no one actual common definition. I have read many research papers on this. But for today's class and for the course that we're going to be working on, our focus is going to be the three models of disciplinary, interdisciplinary, and transdisciplinary. We're also going to talk about multidisciplinary, but later in the hour. So we're going to take each one just to kind of help define it a little bit so we can make sure that we're all on the same page. So let's look at disciplinary. As we said earlier, the models determine how disciplines interact and to what extent they interact. So in a disciplinary model, the subjects or disciplines are taught separately. Each discipline stands alone with its knowledge, skills, and understandings. Students in this model typically are aware of the subject or the discipline that they're learning when they're learning it. So they know and can say, I had math class today, or in science class, we learned X, Y, and Z. All right. So in this model, how do the disciplines interact? There is no interaction, no integration. And to what extent do they interact? They are distinct and separate, right? That's the one we're probably the most familiar with. Let's look at some examples of that. But actually, first, before I do that, often you see, and this has been a common metaphor, you'll see this on many blogs. We often see the metaphor of a lone fruit when thinking about representing disciplinary. So when we look at some examples together, let's look at older grades, an older grade example. You might in math do like a math class, Calculus 1, where all the learning there explores the disciplinary knowledge of calculus and math. You might also have a literature class that explores English literature. Everything in this class is an exploration of that disciplinary knowledge, skills, and understandings. And you might also have a class that explores mechanical and electrical engineering. In these classes, the teachers and students focus on building that disciplinary foundation that's foundational to the knowledge of math, of English, and engineering. If we look at younger grades, in math, they might be learning fractions to build a foundational knowledge of that concept. In PE, they might be learning the skills that is needed to play basketball. And in ELA, they are practicing their narrative writing skills. Each discipline is separate, and teachers are focused on building the foundational knowledge of those skills. That's the foundational knowledge and skills. That's really the focus of the disciplinary approach. Okay. While disciplinary is focused on single disciplines at a time, interdisciplinary model integrates 2 or more disciplines around a common topic. That's really important for us to understand, around a common topic. So there is some level of integration, but it happens at distinct points. If you look at the image that I have in front of you, you'll see 3 circles in a Venn diagram. This means that when we're working on interdisciplinary units, we will have some learning that will integrate. It's the ones that are common, while other learning that is disciplinary focused. So when the learning integrates, it typically does so around a common topic. Typically, students are aware of the various disciplines they're learning, but as I said, the learning in both disciplines, that learning in both of whatever the disciplines that are integrating enhances the understanding of a common topic. A good visual metaphor for interdisciplinary is a fruit salad. So if you could see the different fruit in the fruit salad, you could see them, but often they work together to enhance the taste of that salad. It's kind of a good visual metaphor. Looking at examples of younger grades, imagine a unit with ecosystems at its topic. In science, students are learning, are looking at concepts such as food, webs, and invasive species. At the same time in ELA class, students are learning the skill of identifying main idea in nonfiction articles, but the articles that they are reading are related to invasive species. So I want you to notice here something really quickly I want to point out, that to honor the ELA discipline in an interdisciplinary approach, my focus is on the skill of identifying main idea, but at the same time, I'm using that skill intentionally and authentically and in an unforced way to connect the topic of ecosystem. So there's an intentional effort from the teacher to teach the skill related to that discipline. And you'll see that that's a little slightly different when we talk about transdisciplinary approach. In this same unit, in social studies, the students are learning the impact of urbanization and human activity. You see how in each discipline, kind of the discipline stands alone, but their interaction happens around a common topic. Okay, if you look at an older grades, and this is the reason why I'm even showing you an example of an older grade is because often you go into high school and they'll say, oh no, we can't connect. It's too specific to connect. Well, a few years ago, I taught a Middle East studies class to older high school students in 11th and 12th grade. And the topic that we explored throughout the year together was the Middle East. And we looked at geography as a discipline and focused on how the location of the Middle East contributed to the language and culture of the region. In the same course, students also looked at the diverse range of beliefs and religions of the region, and they also studied the indigenous peoples of the Middle East. We also did ELA, where the students developed specifically their literacy skill on using factual details to write historical fiction. In this specific example, we were focused on intentionally developing the skill of writing historical fiction, and the content of their historical fiction was put into the context of the Middle East. So we're not just writing about the Middle East, but we are exploring the topic of the Middle East as a vehicle to develop a skill in ELA, specifically writing historical fiction using action details. So this means that there is that intentionality or an intentional effort from the teacher to teach the skill related to this discipline while connecting to the topic. And that's kind of a really important distinction when we're talking about interdisciplinary. So what is transdisciplinary? Transdisciplinary is where we fuse and blend, and I use those words very intentionally, 2 or more disciplines to form something new. Because there is that total diffusion of the disciplines, students typically can't tell which subject they're learning. And actually, it doesn't really matter because it's not about the discipline. The learning isn't about the subject anymore. It's about solving a problem or an issue. A good visual metaphor for transdisciplinary learning is a smoothie. You've blended and fused a lot of different fruit together that it created something new, and you can't see where one fruit begins or ends. And that's kind of similar to a transdisciplinary approach. So if you look at an example in the younger grades, we see that they're exploring the issue of erosion in our local environment. And in order to explore this issue fully, they look at several strands or buckets that help shed light on this issue. One strand could be rights and responsibilities. And so they might ask themselves, what responsibility do we have to address this issue? They might also explore innovation and asking themselves, what innovative solutions can we implement to address erosion in our local environment? And they might also look at location. Are there areas or locations that have more erosion than others? And what are our rights or responsibilities towards those locations? So in order to answer these questions, they will need to use their research skills and their presentation skills to communicate their findings broadly. Notice how none of these buckets belong to any one particular discipline. That's different than the other models where you saw, I said in math, in science, and ELA. Here, I'm not presenting this in any kind of disciplinary context. Students aren't concerned with disciplinary specific knowledge or skills. All they are thinking about is how to address the issue of erosion. Let's look at an older example. This is a transdisciplinary unit that might be focused on answering a specific question. This particular example comes from High Tech High schools here in California, where they do some transdisciplinary learning at the end of each of their semesters, and students explore a problem or a question. So here it's how can urban agriculture create functional systems for producing and consuming food. The buckets that they'll research are industrial versus urban agricultural practices, design and innovation, urban infrastructure, and upcycling. Again, none of these buckets fall squarely in any given discipline. It's not about the disciplines anymore. You see how students, you kind of see how students in a transdisciplinary unit, they won't know what class they're in because it's not really, again, about that discipline anymore. So also, if you notice, the teacher here is less intentional about teaching students, for example, in the younger grades, how to research. In fact, in order for them to engage in this transdisciplinary unit, they need to have already developed those research skills already before they do transdisciplinary. So unlike with interdisciplinary model where teachers are intentional about building a skill and teaching to a skill in a specific discipline while also exploring a topic, in a transdisciplinary model, the intent of the teacher is to help students to solve the problem or explore or challenge a solution. And so that is kind of the focus of a transdisciplinary model. So now that we kind of know what the models are, and we've looked at different examples, it's really important for us to explore what is the purpose of each model and when should we use it. Those are also common questions we get asked. If you've not read Worldwise Learning, I would highly recommend it. In this book, authors Carla Marshall and Elizabeth Crawford talk about how they say that an integrated approach views the disciplines as resources from which we can draw purposefully to make sense of the world. This means that a teacher should make a decision on when to use which model with purposeful intentionality. That's going to be really important. It's got to serve a specific purpose. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's look at each model and explore the possible purposes for each of their uses. And you might have, if you were listening carefully, you might have already kind of figured out what I'm going to say here. So if you look at purpose of disciplinary model, in a disciplinary model, disciplinary learning helps develop the background knowledge needed to form concepts and understand issues. We can't expect students to jump into interdisciplinary or transfer understanding between disciplines or even solve a problem if they don't have the foundational knowledge, right? They have to have the foundational knowledge in the discipline. Sometimes going the disciplinary route seems traditional or outdated. Everybody's like, oh, we should just do interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary all the time. In reality, and from a concept-based perspective, we think it's very important. Like disciplinary serves a really important purpose, and without it, students will struggle to connect and transfer learning. But we also recognize that the opposite is true. It shouldn't just all be disciplinary without intentional connections. And we often see that in the older grades in the high school level where teachers want to stay siloed all the time. Well, and then their argument is that there is so much content to cover, they don't have time to integrate. Well, we want to make sure that they have that foundational knowledge and then they are going to be applying it in real world situations or seeing those connections. That's really the definition of deep learning is by transferring. You know, kind of if we look at that again, Marshall and Crawford argue that unless we specifically plan for how the disciplines fit together, a lot of teachers will say, well, we're going to teach them, and then the students are going to make those connections on their own. Well, unless you're actually intentional about that, that connection won't happen. Disciplinary learning can remain a passive classroom exercise, according to Marshall and Crawford, because we're not intentionally trying to model students how they fit together. So they ask, do we expect students to take disjointed disciplinary learning, put the pieces of the puzzle together, and somehow apply it to relevant contexts all by themselves? Of course, we wouldn't expect students to do that. So if we don't scaffold how there are connections to disciplines, we can't expect students to make those connections on their own. So we have to have teachers model how the pieces fit together. This is when we might think of then an interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary model. Right?
Rasha, there's a couple of comments in the chat asking for an example, and I think it's in reference to examples of when you would want to use a disciplinary approach. I think that's when they popped through. If that's not the case, Abdullah, just pop a note in the chat to clarify what you'd like an example of. But can you provide us with an example of when you would want to use a disciplinary approach?
Yeah, so let me go back to that. I'm trying to rearrange my screen for a second here. So I would say if you need to teach students, they need to build any kind of, hold on, let me try to get there. When you would say I need a disciplinary approach is to build background knowledge for students on a specific concept. So if they have no background knowledge on something, then you really do need to kind of tell them, and you need to teach just that, right? That's important for them before you ask them to transfer or to connect that learning beyond a classroom environment. And so I was trying to go back to the examples I showed earlier of disciplinary.
As you're doing that, I can probably give an example as you're just finding that screen. I can give an example from when I was working with quite young students in, kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2. If we were teaching something like persuasive writing, typically I would get them to write a persuasive piece first about something that was really easily accessible. Probably not for kindergarten, but for sort of mid-elementary, you could get them to write an example of we shouldn't have homework, before I asked them to write a more complex, persuasive piece about the unit that we were doing relating to ecosystems or migration. I'm sort of moving into upper elementary there. Or living things or habitats or whatever we wanted to write a persuasive piece that linked to their unit of inquiry. We would need to make sure that they had the foundations first of how to write a persuasive piece. And that intentionally reduces cognitive load. So they're not working with a high content load at the same time as that high instructional load. So we let them explore the idea of a persuasive piece where they won't have to do research to find their compelling argument. They'll be able to draw that just from their life experience. And then once they've established how to write a persuasive piece, we'll move into teaching that persuasive writing in an interdisciplinary way that connects to their unit. Sorry, Rasha, go ahead.
Yeah, no. That was actually a really good example. It's like, the purpose is to reduce cognitive load, but like you have to assess how much do students know about this? Is it the first time they're learning it? Am I going into depth about something that they're not familiar with? So, if I were to think of like calculus and they're learning about, I don't know, now I use an example where I can't really give you examples and I'm not a calculus teacher, but like, I don't know, limits, right? If that's the first time they're learning limits and integration in math, I'm not going to now sit here and build transfer of knowledge to something else. I'm going to first give them that first, and then I'll build their knowledge to be able to connect. That works within a discipline, but that also works across various disciplines, right? And so sometimes we do need to teach specific disciplinary knowledge before we can ask students to connect to something else. I don't know if Rachel's example helped. Where was I?
Let us know if there's any other questions. I'll keep a note of the questions, and we'll have a time for questions at the end. So just pop them into the chat if you've got questions, so that I can start to collect them up.
Okay. I actually don't remember where I was. Were we talking about, we did what? Purposeful integration. What's the purpose of disciplinary? and we were going into the purpose of interdisciplinary, right? Yes, this is where we start. Yep. Okay, so let's kind of look at interdisciplinary and so we know that disciplinary, the purpose for it is to build foundational knowledge. Okay, so what's then is the purpose of interdisciplinary? We might decide to approach learning from an interdisciplinary perspective if we're looking to make meaningful connections between disciplines and to the real world. So in other words, if students are ready to transfer, an interdisciplinary approach helps facilitate that transfer. But it has to be based on some foundational disciplinary knowledge, and it has to be authentic, and it cannot be forced. And we're going to talk about this idea of forced in just a second. And actually, later, I'm going to show you guys some examples of what not to do. So that might actually give you some examples as far as like, when is it appropriate to connect and not connect? And feel free, Rachel, to stop me anytime if there's any questions. I'm not seeing the chat, so I'm not seeing that. Okay, so disciplinary to build foundational knowledge, interdisciplinary when students are ready to transfer. So then when do we decide to choose a transdisciplinary approach? When the learning is not about the disciplines or about how they connect. So we choose a transdisciplinary model when the learning is about, I want to solve a problem, answer a question, explore an issue, and it doesn't matter the discipline, right? So remember we talked about, when I talked about transdisciplinary learning, I said students aren't aware of the disciplines. It's not about what do I know, what do I need to get from math or science, it's about what I need to solve the problem. So one can argue that the disciplines are here diffused, or actually they've totally disappeared in the background. We aren't thinking about math, science, and literacy. So the only thing we need to be careful about when we're thinking of a transdisciplinary is that in order for a transdisciplinary model to be successful, it assumes students have enough foundational knowledge and skills and understandings to engage in an open inquiry about a problem, a question, or an issue. And I'll pause here to give an example. And this happens a lot when I was a PYP coordinator. This would happen a lot, especially our very first year doing the PYP. We were like, oh, you know, our fifth graders had to do this thing where they had to do a lot of research and they had to learn how to like put those trifolds. And we realized really quickly, we never gave them background knowledge on how to organize and use white space and how to like, they were like using tons of fonts and tons of colors, and they started like putting stuff on this trifold. We didn't really talk to them about how to like present and what does it mean, and how do you even stay within a 5-minute presentation. So all of these skills were things that we were like quickly teaching on the spot for them, but it was too much, right? They hadn't had enough background information and background skill to be able to be prepared for being able to just do that or answer that question or solve those problems. So if you're thinking they're going to need to be able to learn how to identify main idea, paraphrase, determine what is a good source and not a good source, all of these are foundational skills they need before engaging in in order for that transdisciplinary connection or that transdisciplinary model to be successful. There might be some who argue that we need to do more of this model. We need more and more transdisciplinary connections. And I will argue that in a CBI, with a CBI approach, we feel that we shouldn't teach in this way all the time, because students need the time to be able to develop those disciplinary specific skills. So in fact, we probably do transdisciplinary the least out of all 3 models. Some example of transdisciplinary, as I said, will be the PYP exhibition. For those, my school currently is not an IB school, and we do a transdisciplinary model when we do the capstone at the end of 4 years, where students are about to graduate. They take a month and they are going to explore an issue or something, and it's kind of like a culminating project that culminates all their learning from their 4 years in high school. Things like that are transdisciplinary in nature. Okay, so let's recap the purpose for each model. The purpose of disciplinary is to build foundational knowledge. It's not a bad word. We should do it when we need it. The purpose of interdisciplinary is to facilitate transfer between disciplines. And the purpose of transdisciplinary is to explore an issue, solve a problem, or answer a question when students are ready to do an open inquiry model. Okay. All right, so what are some things we should avoid when integrating curriculum? So we've talked all about the do's. Let's talk a little bit about some of the don'ts. If you remember the stories that I shared with you in the very beginning of this masterclass, we had an art teacher and a PE teacher, and they were told by well-meaning curricular leaders. I used to be one of them, so I'm not. We're all well-meaning. We want to do the good job that we want to do, but they're told connect, 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 no matter what, connect. But each of these teachers really struggled to do that. So they came up with what I like to call creative but forced ways of connecting, right? And so one of the things, and that's because in our schools, and as I said, I was as a PYP coordinator, I was very much guilty of this. I thought that integrating, even if it was tangential, was better than not integrating. And that's just simply not true. And we know Marshall and Crawford in their book say that none of these approaches are inherently associated with quality. So I don't want you to thinking transdisciplinary is better than interdisciplinary, or disciplinary is better than whatever. Just by having an interdisciplinary unit or a transdisciplinary project does not mean that they are in and of themselves more quality than a regular disciplinary approach. There are great disciplinary units and bad ones, great interdisciplinary units and bad ones, and great transdisciplinary units and bad ones. So what we need to be aware of is that integration is not a means in and of itself. We should not integrate for the sake of integrating. The integration needs to be purposeful. And that goes back to the idea of our purpose in doing this. So to avoid this idea of integration for integration's sake, when building interdisciplinary units, we need to make authentic connections that both honor the rigor of a discipline and enhance student learning of a topic. So I want you to think of those two things: honoring the rigor of each discipline and enhancing student learning of a topic or question or whatever. So I'm going to show you a couple of things, and I want us to think together, is this authentic connection or not? Does it honor the rigor of each discipline? And does it enhance student learning of a topic? So we're going to look at an example. If I have a unit titled Our Amazing Bodies, in science, I might be learning about the digestive and respiratory systems and how they work together. In an effort to connect to this unit, the PE teacher will do an activity where she will take the pulse of students. And my question is this an authentic connection? I want you to think of those two and pop in the chat what you think. Is this an authentic connection? Is the activity taking pulse an authentic connection or not? And then I want you to say why or why not. What do you think? Someone says it's somewhat an authentic connection. Say more. Depends on how it's presented. Somebody says not as a standalone activity, but yes, if the PE curriculum integrates it properly. It's authentic as our bodies are designed in an amazing way, how different systems work. Not that authentic as a PE teacher, I might discuss the pros and cons of smoking on a respiratory system. Okay, so there's a few, what I'm thinking a lot of us are saying is, it depends, right? Well, here's my thing that I will tell you. If it's just like, I gotta connect and there's gonna think we're gonna take the pulse and we're gonna move on, then no, it's not a connection, right? That's not an authentic connection, right? Because what did I say? The requirements were, let me go back so I could show you. Does it honor the rigor of each discipline? And does it enhance student learning of the topic? Does taking pulse honor the rigor of PE? And does it explore the topic? Does it make students explore the topic? So if the only thing the PE teacher does to connect to the unit is for students to take their pulse, my question again is, does this activity honor the rigor? What skills or knowledge are students developing to honor that disciplinary rigor if it does? And is taking one's pulse doing that by itself? Okay. And so I think it doesn't, but let's think how we could make it do that. Perhaps if it makes sense in my scope and sequence, meaning it's the right time of year for me to do this, and this connection is timely. And I have students, for example, taking their pulse before and after exercising, and then they compare their recovery time with other times, and then they talk about how understanding the biology of their bodies can help me be a better athlete. Then yes, I can see this being an authentic connection. But just the activity of like taking my pulse does not mean that they are authentically connecting to just the activity of our amazing bodies, or the topic of our amazing bodies. Do you guys see the difference between those two things? So that would be a more authentic connection. What's really important here is to think activities on their own don't necessarily mean we're connecting meaningfully. I think Dr. Erickson and Lois Lanning call it the potpourri of activities. We're going to do an activity here and an activity here and an activity here. We're going to draw our bodies in art. Well, is that connection meaningful? Like those are the things. And special teachers always get this, unfortunately. I feel bad for them because this is something that they're always being asked to do. So in their book, Marshall and Crawford have some questions that you can ask yourself to kind of determine if something is a meaningful integration or not, or to avoid this idea of integration for integration's sake. They ask, which discipline might we purposefully bring together in this unit given its focus? So if I think of amazing bodies, which disciplines naturally can come together? How similar or different are the disciplines in this unit to each other? So that will kind of give you an idea of whether it's going to be too much of a forced connection or not. And how does this support the intended learning? It's all about that purposeful and intended learning. So if you ask yourself these questions and find that the answers are hard to come by, then you are probably forcing a connection. So don't do it. Right? And I think when I work with teachers, this is the thing that frees them the most, that they realize how much of a burden that forced connection really has upon them. Another example is connecting to a common concept a meaningful way to integrate? That's also a really common question we get. So if you remember that example in the beginning of our hour, we talked about that art teacher connecting to a unit on government systems or on systems. And she's asking, if I connect to the concept of change, is that a meaningful connection or not? Well, the simple answer, I'm going to give it to you ahead of time, is no, it does not. According to a concept-based curriculum instruction model, connecting to a concept is not a meaningful connection. And I'll tell you why. All right, let me give you an example. In this unit, I have the common concept that all the disciplines will try to interact with, and that's the concept of systems. In PE, students will study metabolic systems and body systems. In math, they'll study the metric and imperial systems. In music, they'll study systems of musical notations and modern and ancient musical symbols. In literacy, they will study phonology and morphology and syntax and semantics. I don't even know if students know how to pronounce those words. And in science, they will study the solar system, the ecosystem, the rock cycle, the water cycle, and let's throw in body systems for good measure, right? And in world language, that poor world language teacher might really be struggling to connect to this concept, as students haven't yet developed the level of language fluency to speak about systems in the target language. So because she has to connect, she's like, maybe what I'll do is I'll just teach them the vocab word for the word systems, because maybe that will enhance their learning in some way, shape, or form around the language and around the systems. I'm sorry if I am feeling, if I'm coming across a little sarcastic, because I've seen and lived this several ways, in several multiple ways. In this model, students explore the concept of systems within each discipline. However, does this enhance student understanding of the concept of systems? No. Does it move student understanding in each of the disciplines in a way that honors the rigor of each discipline? Not necessarily. More importantly, do the disciplines interact in any way beyond a tangential connection to the concept of systems? Again, no. So in fact, when you're connecting this way, teachers often feel frustrated and overwhelmed, as the connection often feels forced and the coverage is an inch deep and mile wide. That's certainly the case with the poor science teacher who was left to cover a year or more of content in 6 weeks because we now are doing systems. It's such a broad macro concept. This certainly was the case with the language teacher. In the example above, she knew her students were not ready to handle the language needed to speak about systems. So she also knew that the vocabulary words associated with systems was just not developmentally appropriate, but she had to do it anyhow. So when we talk about making these forced connections, we are not honoring the disciplinary rigor needed to transfer the learning. And so this approach, transfer of learning between the disciplines, does not go beyond concept formation, right? They're just kind of forming their understanding of systems in each of the disciplines. And we know from mind-brain education science that in order to have students go to transfer, they have to develop deep understanding, not concept formation, which is surface level understanding of a concept. So that's why in concept-based curriculum instruction, we avoid connecting disciplines through concepts. That is otherwise known as multidisciplinary, where the discipline explore at a surface level this idea of the same concept. So if you're connecting by concept, that's multidisciplinary, and that is in a concept-based framework a no. We would not recommend you doing that. So important takeaways. We're very close to the end. If you had to walk away with two things, I want you to walk away with two most important ideas here. Number one, choosing a model of integration, whether it's disciplinary, interdisciplinary, or transdisciplinary, should be done purposefully. And number two, it's really important to make authentic connections. Don't force it. And don't have your students, your teachers force it either. That's really important. All right, so we started by saying we have 3 guiding questions. Let's see if we did this, and we're going to do a little review. So be prepared. Pop quiz in the chat. What is integrated curriculum, and what are the various models? If you can remember, what did we say about the various models? There are 3 models. What are they? I know it's going to take people a while to like type. It's much easier for me to say them, but I'll pause for a second, just quickly write them. And these are the 3 words I always misspell them, always. So yes, disciplinary, interdisciplinary, and transdisciplinary. Thank you so much. There are others that we haven't talked about, but we also talked about multidisciplinary, big no-no, not to do. What is the purpose of each model and when should you use it? We talked about disciplinary. What's the purpose of disciplinary? It is to build, say it with me, maybe you can say it while you're muted, foundational knowledge. Thank you so much. Interdisciplinary helps us to transfer learning, and transdisciplinary helps us to answer a question or explore a problem or a solution. So that we talked about that. And then finally, what should we avoid when writing an integrated unit? We should avoid forcing the connection. We should avoid connecting via these tangential concepts, and we should avoid just these inauthentic activities. We want to make sure that the activity is meaningful. Right. And so that's kind of, that's our master course today. There is a lot more that we can explore together. I'll let Rachel talk about this. We do have a course that we are offering, Mastering the Art of Integrating Curriculum with a CBI Approach. I'll let Rachel talk about that.
So this course came about because when we were running other courses like our concept-based inquiry and action course and many of our other discipline-specific courses, people kept asking about, but what does this look like? How do we support this in an interdisciplinary? And I work in a transdisciplinary curriculum. How do we develop those kinds of units? And so I said to Rasha, I think you're right, it was 2 or 3 years ago, I think we need to make a course that's specific to integrated curriculum and help people to be able to talk about the different approaches in their schools. So what does it mean? I personally believe that it's a misconception to say that we are one particular approach. I think, as Rasha has proven today, all have value in our classroom, and we want to be intentional about making those choices. So this is a 4-week online course. It is taught through a combination of self-paced videos. If you've done any of our other courses, you'll be familiar with the format. Self-paced videos that you can watch yourself during the week, and then a live Zoom call with Rasha each weekend. We offer those weekend calls at 2 different times so that regardless of where you are in the world, you shouldn't have to get up in the middle of the night to join the session. So, and then at the end of the course, you have a one-on-one coaching call to get support on the unit that you are developing. So I highly recommend that. It will be starting on Monday, the 14th of October. You can register for that course now, and in a moment, I'll pop the link into the chat for you so that you're able to take a look with more details on that. And now we'll go over to questions. Here is the link for that. You can also find it on our website, professionallearninginternational.com, if you're interested in finding out more.
Yeah. I see. I'm just kind of scrolling in the chat and I see somebody saying, if not connecting by a concept, what other ways can we integrate disciplines so that it's purposeful and not forced? If you're doing an interdisciplinary connection, it will be by a topic, right? So you want to connect to a topic, not a concept, like the example I gave you about our amazing bodies, or the ecosystems example, or the Middle East studies example. And if in transdisciplinary, the connection is to answer a question, to solve a problem, or to explore an issue. And I showed you guys a couple of examples in the masterclass with that as well.
Yeah, so some people also from a long time ago, the word topic became a bad word at some point because we thought, we need to move beyond topics. But actually the topic, think about the topic as the content. And the content provides the foundation for building those connections. So we want some shared content that helps students to see real world connections, that gives us a reason to write. We also sometimes see at the beginning of the year, we often see these units, and I was talking to one of our other CBI consultants last night who was shaking her head in terms of the units that she was seeing in schools, and it related to these units in science where there's a 6-week unit on what is a scientist or becoming a scientist. You can't really spend 6 weeks learning about the scientific process without having some content that's meaningful to address. So these units that start the year where it's just a skills-based unit, I really try and push back and question those because we want to be learning skills in context. And so it's about giving a meaningful context or content to the development of those skills. All right. There was another question that came up earlier, and the question was, do you think transdisciplinary learning can weaken learners? What do you think about that, Rasha, or can be harmful to learners?
I think it could be very powerful, and I think it could be harmful. I think all three, if used exclusively and not as part of your toolbox, and you are purposeful and intentional, can be harmful, sure, meaning like students wouldn't learn. The problem with transdisciplinary learning, from our perspective, is that if students are engaged, like they need foundational knowledge, and when are they going to get it? If in order for them to make those authentic connections and be able to do it. And so without that, then I actually argue that if you're doing transdisciplinary learning all the time, you're kind of probably doing some disciplinary learning anyhow, because you have to give them the knowledge. Like it's the same thing when we did the PYP exhibition. It's like we realized they have no idea how to like think of like the artistic presentation of a like the trifold. So we had to do some disciplinary specific, like in an art and what you think, and like how to use white space. So if they tell you they're not, they probably are somehow doing it, if they're doing transdisciplinary all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that knowledge and skills foundation is so important for student success in a transdisciplinary classroom.
Yeah, and Sherry says, she says some teachers will argue to leave students explore first. That's different, I think. And Rachel, you can talk a little bit more about that because you talk about that in your concept-based inquiry course, like the idea of exploring or kind of like doing a little bit of like discovery, or to see if students what they know about a topic. That's different than like the entire unit is an open inquiry unit. That's different in my opinion.
Mm. And so you want to be really mindful of the time that we're leaving the students in that space, because discovery learning has been shown through a lot of research to have a poor outcome for students. When we think about concept-based inquiry, we advocate for structured and guided inquiry most of the time, and some space for open inquiry in the classroom. And open inquiry is where we tend to shift more into a transdisciplinary approach. But discovery learning is not well supported in research because students will hold on to misconceptions. So if we don't actively disrupt those misconceptions, then obviously going back to that, is it harmful? It's not going to have good outcomes for students. So we need to be really mindful of that they have that strong foundation and that they're well supported in being able to do the research and solve those problems or issues or answer questions. All right, any other questions before we finish up? I'm hearing intentional and alignment, choosing the right approach. Absolutely. So Rasha is absolutely right when she says think about it as a toolbox. That disciplinary is powerful, interdisciplinary is powerful, and transdisciplinary is powerful, but we want to be intentional about what we're teaching and when we use each approach. All right, I think that's it in terms of questions. Thank you again for joining us today. I know that some of you are up early or up late to be able to connect. It's such a pleasure. Many of you are going into the first weeks of your school year now, so we wish you all the best for this new school year. It's an exciting time for teachers to be meeting their new students, but also a very, very busy time. So we appreciate at this crazy busy time of year that all of you, and in fact, Rasha, who's getting her school set up for the new year as well, have taken the time to join us today. So thanks, everyone. We'll see you again next time.
Yes. Take care, everyone.